Hello, I'm Tammy Marshall, author of Twinges and other novels. Here it is, the end of October of 2025, and I thought it was time to share another chapter of my cozy thriller about a serial killer called Twinges. Here we are, still early in the book, though. I'm going to read you chapter 4. If you haven't had a chance yet, you might want to go back and listen to the first few chapters. But we have Nora, an elementary teacher, who is able to kind of sense what her students are going to become. And unfortunately, she has sensed that one of her young charges, a boy named Jeremy, has a very evil future ahead of him. He's still young right now. So let's see what's happening here in chapter 4. The next morning, as the students filed into class, Nora stood in the hallway by her door, greeting each child and watching for Simon and Jeremy. With only a couple minutes to spare before the final bell, the two boys came around the corner from the main entryway staircase. They were chattering away as if they'd never had a cross word with each other. Nora forced a big smile and said, "Well, it's so nice to see you two getting along again." Simon stole a quick glance at Jeremy, but didn't look up at his teacher until he saw Jeremy doing it. The little cat murderer, as Nora was now thinking of him, gave her a thin-lipped smile before saying, "Simon's my friend, Miss Matthews. I can't stay mad at my friend." Seeing Simon's discomfiture and the almost pleading quality of his eyes, Nora simply clapped her hands together once as she exclaimed, "Wonderful! I love it when kids can work out their problems. It shows real maturity. Now get inside and get yourselves ready for a great day." She hustled the boys inside and followed them just as the final morning bell rang. Watching Jeremy from the corner of her eye, Nora went about the start of the day routine, taking lunch count and attendance, saying the Pledge of Allegiance, listening to stories of things that had happened to them since she'd last seen them yesterday. And then she reminded them about the upcoming standardized test they'd be taking next week. "So we're going to do one more practice sheet to help you all be as ready as possible." Predictably, most of the students grumbled, yet they all reached into their desks for their special number 2 pencils, which Nora had given each of them for this very occasion. Since it would be their first ever standardized test, Nora had wanted them to feel as at ease as possible, so she'd bought colorful pencils with words of praise running down their sides in gold lettering. She waited for them all to prepare, and then she passed out the sample practice tests. They were only a fourth the length of the real test would be, but they allowed the students to see the types of questions they'd be asked. For those who were slow at reading, like a girl who sat next to Jeremy, Nora and a couple of aides stood nearby to help them read the questions and possible answers. Nora took up a position by the girl so she could also check on Jeremy, but by the time Nora had helped her through the second question, Jeremy had finished all 10 questions. Nora scanned his answers quickly over his shoulder and saw that they were all correct. She wasn't surprised, because he'd always shown evidence of high intelligence, despite his poor grades, which were mostly due to incomplete or missing assignments from all his absences. If he wasn't at school, Jeremy simply refused to make up any work he missed, so his grades showed C's where A's should be. She quietly reminded him to turn over his test paper if he was done, and as he flipped the paper, Nora turned her attention back to the struggling student. Reading the next question as she pointed to each word for the girl to follow along, Nora noticed a little wiggling sort of movement coming from Jeremy. She pretended not to notice, though, as she continued reading aloud quietly. Jeremy was attempting to pull something out of the front pocket of his jeans. But since he was seated and his jeans were a little snug on him, as were most of his clothing, he struggled to get his hand down to the bottom of the pocket. He finally fished something out, but kept it hidden within his clenched fist in his lap. Nora still pretended not to notice him, even though she could tell he turned his face toward her to see if she was watching. She finished reading the last possible answer choice and then leaned back in the small chair she'd brought to sit beside the girl in order to give her a few minutes to consider her answers. As she leaned back, the girl's head and body momentarily blocked her line of sight to Jeremy's face, but she could still see his clenched hand. Jeremy used that moment to thrust his closed fist deep inside his desk and deposit something there. Nora thought she detected a metallic clink, but she couldn't be certain over the noises that were becoming quite audible as the remaining students finished their practice tests, flipped over their papers, loudly put their special pencils away, and otherwise made impatient movements in their seats. One second, I have to adjust my. Sorry about that. My shade doesn't like to cooperate. All right. Otherwise made impatient movements in their seats. Nora rose and beckoned for one of the aides to assist the girl while she took control of the classroom. She glanced at Jeremy as he pulled his hand out, now devoid of whatever he'd put in his desk. Before she stepped away, the boy looked up at her, and Nora thought she saw a sly look pass across his face before it became utterly impassive. Time for reading, Miss Matthews? Jeremy asked her, a guileless expression plastered across his face. She faked a smile. Yes, Jeremy, it is. Would you lead the others to the reading nook? He jumped out of his seat with such boyish enthusiasm that Nora immediately doubted every thought she'd had about him during the past couple of days. She followed him, rounding up the stragglers. Join us as soon as you finish, she called back to the girl, and the aide acknowledged her request with a quick smile. Nora took her seat in the special reading area and asked the students questions about what they remembered from the story so far. Then she started to read and felt herself pulled into the story along with her students by her strong delivery. Reading aloud was one of the skills that served her well as a first grade teacher. While most of the children could read easy sentences, they couldn't yet read the types of stories that thoroughly captivated them without lots of stumbles and frustration. Instead, the students fell under Nora's spell as she narrated and became the voices of the characters in Charlotte's Web. As Charlotte wove her magical webs, Nora temporarily forgot all about her misgivings concerning Jeremy. At the end of the school day, after she'd served bus duty and seen Jeremy ride away on his bicycle, Nora returned to her classroom and locked the door so that she wouldn't be unexpectedly disturbed. Then she hurried to Jeremy's desk, pushed aside his small chair, crouched to peer into the depths of the desk, and reached her hand to the very back of it. Her hand touched something, and her heart sank. It was another collar. Slowly she pulled the collar out and looked at it. This collar was bright green and covered with an encircling pattern of little white dog bones. There were two tags hanging from it. The first was a tag indicating the license number assigned by the city, and the second tag bore proof of a rabies vaccination with the name of a local veterinarian stamped into the metal. There wasn't any tag providing ownership or an address. Nora took the collar to her desk and wrote down the city license number on a notepad. Then she returned the collar to Jeremy's desk for the time being. Best not to raise his suspicions any further, she quietly told the empty classroom. Pulling the note from the pad, Nora grabbed her take-home bag and keys and hurried out the back door of the school to her car parked in the teacher's lot. If the traffic was light enough, she might make it to the city offices before they closed for the day. The City Hall offices were in a squat old building in a block off the city's main street. Since she seldom had need to visit the building, Nora located the office registry on the wall just off the entryway and scanned the listing, unsure where to go to register a pet. A male voice behind her asked, "Can I help you find something?" Pausing her finger on the glass overlay that covered the list of offices, Nora craned her neck to see who was addressing her. A man in a slightly rumpled suit and carrying a well-used briefcase stepped closer. He had an open, questioning look on his face, a day's growth of stubble on his chin, a full head of unruly blondish hair, and blue eyes that sparkled even though they were ringed with dark circles. He stood looking at her, awaiting a reply. Nora smiled briefly and then looked back at the list. "Where do you go to register a dog?" The man's face lit up. "Ah, you have a dog. What kind?" She dropped her hand and turned to face him. No, it's not that. I just have a question." She felt embarrassed before the stranger. That wasn't her usual reaction to being asked something by an unknown person. After all, she was a teacher, and she'd long ago lost her fear of talking to people. However, she just realized that she didn't know how to explain what it was she needed to know, so she wasn't sure how to proceed. His smile faded a bit at her obvious confusion. Oh, okay. Well, go to the registration office, 3 doors down on your left. He pointed down the tiled hallway. Thank you, she replied as she hiked her purse strap higher on her shoulder. Then, as if remembering her manners, she suddenly thrust her hand out in front of her and waited for him to shake it. Seeing the gesture, he switched his briefcase to his left hand and took her right one in his own. His palm was a bit sweaty from holding the leather handle of his briefcase. Involuntarily, Nora's face registered a bit of revulsion upon contact with his clammy hand. He noticed and jerked his hand away. As he rubbed his palm on his pant leg, he said, Sorry about that. Been a long day. She nodded and waved away his apology. Thanks again, she said as she moved down the hall. No problem. If you're ever in the building again and need help finding something, just drop by. My office is right there. He pointed to a darkened door on her right. Nora looked at it and read, Office of the City Attorney, stenciled across the glass. She paused momentarily as she wondered if this man should be the one to ask, instead of someone at the registration office. But she decided against it as quickly as the thought had entered her head. Seeing her brief stop, he called after her. That's me, Mike Buchanan, city attorney. She said, Thank you, Mr. Buchanan, I will. She waved a farewell and hurried down the hall. Before she stepped into the registration office, though, Nora turned to see if the attorney was still there, but the hallway was empty. The smile that had been in limbo faded away as she entered the large office. An elderly woman at the front desk ignored Nora's approach as she continued to input information into an obsolete computer. Nora allowed a sufficient amount of time to pass before finally saying, Excuse me. The woman briefly held up a finger and then continued to type without looking once at Nora. Nora scanned the office space for signs of anyone else who might help her, but it seemed as if everyone else had gone home for the day. Finally, the woman stopped typing, sighed audibly, and lowered her reading glasses. And she gazed up at Nora, blinking her eyes as if she were attempting to focus them. Yes? She bluntly asked. Nora again felt uncertain of how to proceed, but she finally asked, If I have the ID number of a pet, can you tell me who the owner is? The woman made an odd movement with her mouth and then a wet clacking sound, and Nora realized that the woman was adjusting her false teeth. Well, I can't just give out personal information like that. Somebody's dog bothering you? That's a matter for the police. She seemed about to return to her typing, so Nora spoke more firmly. No, that's not the problem. I, I found a collar on the street, but it only has the city tag on it, so I was hoping to return the collar to the owner if possible. The woman held out a thin, claw-like hand, palm up. Let me see it. Nora recoiled a bit. No, I didn't bring it with me. The woman scowled at her. Nora tried to laugh to dispel her awkwardness. Sorry, it's at home, but I wrote down the number on this note. She reached into her purse and pulled out the folded note. Nora carefully read the number to the woman and then waited as the woman moved at sloth-like speed to enter it into the database search. Suddenly, an odd expression flickered across the woman's face, and she peered over the top frame of her lenses to level a hard gaze at Nora. You said you found this collar? Nora swallowed. Yes. The woman narrowed her eyes a fraction. Where'd you find it? Excuse me? Nora was feeling as if she were a suspect in the interrogation room. The woman now pulled her glasses off, leaned back in her chair, which creaked ominously, and crossed her arms. She set her chin in such a way that Nora knew she'd need to provide more information before she'd receive what she wanted. I asked you where you found it. Nora attempted to swallow, but her mouth had gone completely dry. On the street, in the park. Her interrogator's stenciled on eyebrows shot up and blended in with the deep wrinkles that covered her forehead. Is that so? Then the same eyebrows dived down and collided over her nose. Which park? We have at least 20, you know. Memorial Park, Nora replied quickly, giving the name of the only park she could think of at that moment. Can you please just tell me who it belongs to so I can return it? The woman pushed the note across the counter back to Nora. No need. The dog's registered to the city attorney. He reported her missing this morning. Nora's eyes widened as her hand shot instinctively to her mouth. Oh no. She slowly reached out and clutched at the note. The woman stood now and leaned over the counter toward Nora. She shook her finger at Nora as she said, "That dog's his prized possession, a gift from his wife a couple months before she died of cancer because she didn't want to leave that fine man all alone in this town. He's out of his mind worried about that dog. So, young lady, if you know where she is, you'd best be telling him." By now the woman was standing fully erect, and her tone had increased with each straightening section of her normally hunched vertebrae. She huffed slightly and plopped back into her chair. "His name is Mike Buchanan." Nora finished the woman's sentence in a daze. Then she blinked and shoved the note back into her purse. "Thank you. I'll be sure to bring him the collar tomorrow." The woman's cranky expression instantly softened with concern. "Oh no, don't you wait until tomorrow. Take it to him tonight. His address is in the book, but I can give you directions." She was standing again and gesturing wildly. "You just take this street out front, you see, and then you go about 5." Nora cut her off. "Thank you, I can find it. You say it's in the book, right?" She was slowly backing toward the office doorway. The woman was picking up the phone and calling after her. "I'll just give him a quick call and let him know you're coming." She started flipping through a small directory and then ran her finger down a page. Nora pleaded from the doorway, "Oh, please don't bother him." She saw that the woman was dialing, so Nora rushed out of the office and down the hallway. Since she'd only seen the attorney a few minutes ago, she doubted he'd be home yet to receive the phone call. But then she froze as she realized that the woman was most likely calling his cell phone. "Oh, what was I thinking coming down here?" she asked her reflection in the glass of the main door to the building. Then she pushed it open and stepped outside. Nora hurried to her car, an old faded green sedan she'd inherited from her parents as her congratulatory gift when she'd landed her first teaching job. The car had been fairly old when they'd given it to her, but it had been well maintained, so it ran well, at least for a few years. However, more and more lately, the car had been giving her problems. She had saved up enough for a down payment on a new car, but she didn't feel comfortable car shopping alone. And since the fates had so far not graced her life with a husband or even a long term boyfriend, and since her mother now lived across the country in a retirement village, Nora simply continued to drive her, up till recently, reliable car. She got into the car, carefully avoiding sliding too much across the worn leather at the edge of the seat. As she fumbled to locate the correct key on her heavily laden ring, she dropped the whole bunch, so she had to fish around on the thin floor mat to grab them. This caused her to crouch forward awkwardly in her seat, and her left breast to be momentarily lodged in the steering wheel. Cursing now, she finally located the correct key again and inserted it in the ignition. She turned the key and was met with a litany of clicks. Nora closed her eyes and tried once more. The engine made a dull, dying gasp and was silent. "Son of a bitch!" Nora slammed both hands against the steering wheel. "Why now?" she asked the dark console, but it didn't reply. Sighing, Nora pulled the hood release by her left calf and got out of the car. Then she carefully reached through the opening provided by the slightly ajar hood and felt around for the release lever. She'd become adept at locating it these past few months as her car had become more and more temperamental. She lifted the hood and propped it open. Seeing the corrosion that had built up on the battery again, Nora yanked her keys out of the ignition and walked to the trunk. She removed a grimy cloth from the mostly empty trunk and returned to the engine. As she rounded the raised hood, she was startled to find a man leaning in and peering at the engine from the other side of the car. She emitted a tiny shriek and dropped the rag. Please excuse the noise of my dogs in the background. That was me, not the story. So she emitted a tiny shriek and dropped the rag. Mike Buchanan reacted to her scream with a little jump of his own, and as he recoiled, he banged the back of his head on the open hood. "Oh, you scared me," Nora said with her right hand clutched tightly over her chest. Mike rubbed his head and winced. "Sorry, I just pulled up." "Stop." He pointed to a shiny black Jeep. "And I noticed you seem to have car trouble. Do you need a jump? I have cables." Nora bent to retrieve the rag. "I don't know. Maybe. I think it's just from the corrosion." She began wiping at the battery connectors. How old is that battery?" He was dubiously watching the movement of the rag. Nora shrugged. "I think my father installed a new one when he gave me the car." Mike had walked around the front of the vehicle and was now standing next to her. "And when was that?" Answering as she continued to scrub at the built up corrosion. "About 8 years ago." He chuckled lightly. Then just stop what you're doing. You need a new battery. She glanced up at him. Are you sure? He nodded. Completely. Then he gestured toward his idling jeep. I can give you a lift to my brother's shop. I'm sure he'll have what you need. She stepped back. Oh, no, I don't want to be a bother. Mike seemed to study her. Then he smiled. It's no bother. But before we go, why don't you tell me your name? Nora thought of giving him a false name like she'd done with Mildred O'Keefe, but since she knew he was the city attorney, she realized it might not be too smart to do that. Nora Matthews, excuse me. I'm Nora Matthews. Nice to meet you, Nora. His lips twitched in a playful smile. Officially, this time. If you don't remember my name, it's Mike Mike Buchanan. Nora finished for him. I remember. As a teacher, you get good at recalling names quickly. She walked to the still open trunk, tossed in the rag, and slammed the lid shut. He had followed her. Can I assume you're the lady who found my dog? His voice was calm, but Nora could hear the expectancy in it. She shook her head as she said, No, I didn't find your dog, just the collar. Nora heard the sharp intake of his breath before he said, Her collar? Where did you find it? Nora faced the attorney and saw the worry now crawling across his features. She bit her lip and then said, Mr. Buchanan, I'm a teacher, an elementary teacher, and your dog's collar, if it's your dog's, in fact, is in the possession of one of my students. He frowned. What? I don't understand. Bertha said some lady knew where my dog was, said that she'd seen it in a park. Nora shot her eyes toward the city building, regretting her decision to come here today before she thought things through better. Then she looked at the open hood of her car. If you're serious about that lift to get a new battery, we can run by the school and I'll show you the collar. If it really belongs to your dog, then we can discuss things further. Mike nodded. Okay, let's go then. He gently lowered the hood as Nora reached into the car for her purse. Mike called to her. Leave it unlocked. I'm going to call my brother and see if he can just come here and take care of it for you. Wouldn't that be too much of a bother for him? The attorney already had his cell phone to his ear. Nora looked around the empty parking lot. She heard him ask for a man named Joe. Recognition set in then. Joe's Automotive. That had to be Mike's brother's place. She drove by it every time she went for groceries, but she'd never been in. What year is your Buick? Mike asked her. She struggled to remember. I think it's a 1990 model. Then she shrugged. Want me to check the book? Mike mouthed no and continued his phone conversation. After he ended it, he snapped his phone shut and said, It's all set. He'll come by in about 10 minutes and give it a look over. He said he'll bring the tow truck just in case. You'll need to leave the keys. Uh, uh-oh. Nora suddenly felt a small tendril of fear crawl up her spine. Mike assured her, The car will be fine. Here, just leave the car key only. He held out a hand, and Nora dropped her packed keyring into his palm. He spied the one for the car and deftly removed it. Then he returned the remaining keys to her, opened the driver's door, and slipped the key under the floor mat. Nora turned red as she recalled the condition of her very faded and very worn floor mats, but Mike didn't seem to notice anything amiss. He followed her around to the passenger side of his Jeep and opened the door for her. Nora felt even more embarrassed as she climbed into the spotless interior of his vehicle. As Mike slid into the driver's seat, she said, Nice car. He thanked her and then asked, Which school? Washington Elementary. He put the Jeep in gear. No, just where that is. Not too far from my house, actually. Oh, yeah? Did your kids attend there too? His friendly smile faded, and Nora wanted to slap herself as the little bit of information Bertha had shared with her came rushing to the surface of her thoughts. I don't have any kids, Mike told her dully. He flicked on his blinker and turned down a tree-lined side street that Nora knew would take them straight to her school. I married a little late in life. My wife was also an attorney with aspirations to be a judge. It wasn't the right time for kids then, and later, well, she got sick and died. So, no kids. Mike was staring grimly at the road ahead of them. Nora said, I'm sorry, occupational hazard, I guess. Elementary teacher, so I just naturally ask people about their kids. His face relaxed and he said, That's why she gave me Pepper before she died. She wanted me to have someone to keep me company. In the end, we both regretted not having children. He slowed and parked the Jeep in front of the school. Then he turned to face Nora, and she saw his eyes were watering. Pepper is my baby, Nora. So if you can help me find her, please do so. Nora swallowed, but her mouth suddenly had gone dry. So she simply nodded as she opened the door and slid out of the vehicle. Well, thank you for staying with me all that time if you have. And that was chapter 4 of Twinges. Um, and again, I apologize for my two dogs making a lot of noise in the background and my window shade deciding not to cooperate. But I really hope you'll go back and read the others. And this book, along with my other 6 novels, are all available on Amazon. Most are mystery suspense. This one is the one, again, I have kind of my only thriller, cozy thriller, I call it, because I don't get into anything gory. Um, but yes, thank you again for staying with me.